The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS. The regional bloc, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has been touted as a serious counterweight to the Western-led world order.
And here's another battle that the West is fighting, a battle of narratives, a battle to win new allies, only that it is failing miserably at this. Forget new allies. Even old friends of the West are ditching it, like Saudi Arabia. First, it refused to ramp up oil production for the European Union, and now it wants to be a part of BRICS.
The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS. Now, BRICS is an acronym for the 5 major emerging global economies, namely Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia is engaged in a cold war with the very same United States. Well, because Saudi has decreased the oil production by 2 million barrels to worsen the inflation in the U.S. So in this case study, let's do a deep dive and try to understand what exactly is this BRICS alliance all about. How will Saudi Arabia's entry into this BRICS alliance change the position of world power itself? And lastly, what is Putin's idea of the BRICS currency? You know what, guys, if you take a pause and look at BRICS countries closely, you will see that these 5 countries together consist of 41% of the world's population. And their combined GDP is over 24.4 trillion US dollars. On top of that, they also have a substantial military capability and an increasing political influence in the global sphere. And by coming together, this group commands a voice for itself in the global sphere. Now the question is, why does Saudi Arabia want to join the BRICS alliance? This is a story that started as soon as the Russia-Ukraine war started, and like we saw, at first the price of oil skyrocketed, then slowly the price of oil started dropping from its peak, and then the oil price dropped to lower than the pre-war numbers. And this is where the Saudi and the OPEC countries were scared that the recession will bring down the price of oil even further. Because every time the recession happens, the oil price drops to very, very low levels. So in order to increase their revenue, they decided to cut their production by 2 million barrels a day. As a result, the price of oil shot off from $91 a barrel to $94 a barrel. And while this move was extremely beneficial for the OPEC countries, but on the other side, it created a havoc in the West. President Biden says there will be consequences for Saudi Arabia after the kingdom sided with other oil-producing countries to significantly cut production. And this is where U.S. violated the petrodollar agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And this agreement is nothing but the meeting between Franklin Roosevelt and the Saudi king. And what was this deal about? Saudi Arabia would sell oil in dollars and the U.S. would provide weapons to Saudi Arabia. So when Biden threatened the consequences and threatened to pass the bill to stop weapon trade, Saudi said, okay, if you threaten us with the weakening of our security, we're going to mess with your dollars. And more importantly, if you look at the past 3 years' data, you will see that Saudi has already started to make defense deals both with China and Russia so that they are not over-dependent on the U.S. Secondly, the Biden government wants to lift the economic sanctions on Iran, who is Saudi's enemy in the Middle East. And the third reason has to do with the oil consumption of BRICS countries. Like China, Brazil, and India are the biggest consumers of oil in the world, so if Saudi joins BRICS, Saudi will have the backing of the biggest oil buyers in the world. These are the reasons why Saudi wants to join the BRICS. But the question is, what will happen when Saudi joins BRICS? Well, the first thing that is going to happen is that the U.S. economy will be on its path to ruins. The U.S. bank interest will spike. Because since the majority of the oil can be bought only in dollars, all the countries keep their dollar reserves with the U.S. banks. And because they are anyways using the dollar to trade oil, they use the surplus dollars for other trade purposes, like they have invested in the U.S. economy in the form of U.S. Treasury bonds. And all the countries in the world have their surplus foreign reserves invested in the U.S. economy. This money in total amounts to 7.5 trillion US dollars, and this money is used by the U.S. banks to lend to American businesses at very, very low interest rates. As a result, debt is very, very cheap in the U.S. So eventually, American businesses prosper and their economy keeps on growing. So basically, Saudi selling oil to U.S. gives the U.S. a $7 trillion advantage. So if Saudi joins BRICS and signs the agreements and starts directly trading with India and China, then 2 of the biggest consumers of oil will no longer be using dollars to trade. And this is a huge setback for the U.S. because China alone holds $1 trillion worth of U.S. bonds, so if they're not buying oil in dollars, the Chinese could sell those bonds, and that could put a dent in the American economy. So even if only China pulls out its treasury bonds, the US will have $1 trillion less in bonds. And this brings us to the most important question of all, and that is, how will Saudi's entry into the BRICS could change world currency? Putin have something called the BRICS currency coming. And according to Putin's announcement, this new currency would act like a basket containing the value of 5 BRICS countries' currency, which are the Chinese renminbi, the Russian ruble, the Indian rupee, the Brazilian real, and the South African rand. This basket would make it semi-decentralized and more stable than the US dollar. And to give the currency even more power and stability, according to reports, this currency could be gold-backed. In simple words, the value of a gold-backed currency means that the currency can now be exchanged with gold. For example, 1 gram of gold equals 50,000 rupees. What it means is that tomorrow, if you give 50,000 rupees to RBI, they would redeem its value by giving you 1 gram of gold. But with fiat currency, it's not backed by any commodity. So if I pay you 500 rupees, it simply means that I promise to pay 500 rupees back. Now, if the government has 1 kilogram of gold and 1 gram of gold is worth 50,000 rupees, then the government can only print 50,000 multiply 1,000, which is 50 million rupees. And if they want to print more money, they will first have to buy more gold and keep it in the reserve and then print money. But with fiat currency, they can simply go on to print money, and this could cause inflation in the economy. So as a trader, I can be more confident about the value of my trade. And if Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS, it will not just be gold, but even oil that will lay the foundations for the BRICS currency. And that is the reason why Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. And that's all for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, then please don't forget to hit the subscribe button.